The galaxy had forgotten what hope looked like. For 6 brutal years, the Carvax dominion spread through star systems like a living plague. Entire civilizations disappeared overnight. Planetary shields failed. Moons shattered. Oceans boiled beneath orbital bombardments. Every species that resisted was erased so completely that only drifting wreckage remained to prove they had ever existed. And now the Dominion had reached the final defensive sector of the Orion Union. Valaris Prime burned beneath them. Massive alien warships hung above the planet like iron mountains, blotting out entire sections of the sky. Their red energy beams rained endlessly onto the cities below, turning towers into collapsing firestorms. Millions of civilians flooded evacuation zones while soldiers desperately tried to hold collapsing defense lines. Children cried beside overloaded transport ships. Mothers screamed names lost in the chaos. Everywhere, people looked upward in terror. Inside the underground command bunker beneath the capital city, Supreme Marshal Kale stared at the tactical display with hollow eyes. The glowing map of orbital space showed hundreds of blinking red symbols disappearing one after another. Each one represented another destroyed fleet. Another dead crew. Another failed defense. "We lost the 7th carrier group," an officer whispered quietly. Nobody reacted anymore. There was no energy left for shock. Kale slowly removed his gloves and rubbed his exhausted face. He hadn't slept in 3 days. Around him, commanders moved like ghosts through the dim bunker light, while emergency sirens echoed endlessly through the steel walls. "How long until orbital collapse?" Kale finally asked. The answer came after a painful silence. 26 minutes, sir." The room became still. 26 minutes until the Dominion broke through completely. 26 minutes until Valaris Prime died. A communications officer suddenly looked up from his station nervously. "Supreme Marshal, incoming transmission from the Dominion flagship." Kale closed his eyes briefly. "Put it through." The giant central screen flickered to life. The face that appeared was enormous, pale, and terrifyingly calm. Warlord Draxel Vorn, leader of the Dominion, destroyer of 14 civilizations. His black-armored shoulders filled the screen while glowing yellow eyes stared directly into the bunker, as if he could already see their graves. "People of the Orion Union," Draxel said coldly, "your resistance has ended." Behind him, burning worlds rotated slowly across massive holographic displays. "You were offered surrender, instead you chose extinction." No one spoke. The warlord leaned closer. "Kneel now, and your deaths will be painless." A young officer beside Kale clenched his fists so hard they trembled. Another quietly looked away to hide tears. Because deep down, everyone knew the Dominion had already won. Then suddenly, a loud beep interrupted the transmission. Several officers turned in confusion. "Sir, we're receiving another signal," the communications operator said. Kale frowned. "From where?" The officer stared at his console, confused. "That's impossible." "What is it?" The operator swallowed hard. "The signal is coming from outside mapped space." The bunker fell silent. Draxel's image remained on screen, watching curiously as technicians scrambled to trace the unknown transmission. Static crackled through the speakers. Then a calm voice emerged. "This is Terran Expeditionary Fleet Command responding to emergency distress beacon, requesting battlefield status." Nobody moved. Nobody even breathed. One commander slowly looked toward Kale. "Terran." The word itself sounded ancient. Impossible. Humans were legends, stories, a species believed extinct centuries ago after disappearing beyond explored space following catastrophic internal wars. Most historians believed humanity destroyed itself long ago. Kale stepped closer to the console carefully. "This is Supreme Marshal Kale of the Orion Union," he answered slowly. "If this transmission is genuine, you must leave immediately. This system is lost." Several seconds passed. Then the unknown voice replied calmly. "Negative." More static echoed briefly. Then came another sentence. one that changed the entire battlefield forever. Deploying the Armada. At first, nothing happened. Then every sensor station in orbit overloaded simultaneously. Warning sirens erupted across the bunker. Massive gravitational distortion detected. Hyperspace rupture forming. Reading thousands of incoming signatures. Kale looked upward sharply. Even Draxel Vorn's expression changed for the first time. Outside the planet, space itself began twisting violently. The stars disappeared behind expanding waves of blue light. Then, something emerged. A gigantic black warship slowly pushed through the rupture, larger than anything the galaxy had ever built. Its hull carried countless scars from ancient battles. Blue engine fire stretched behind it like burning rivers. And behind it came more ships. Hundreds, then thousands. An endless wall of Terran warships poured into the system until the stars themselves vanished behind steel and shadow. The massive flagship alone eclipsed one of Valaris Prime's moons completely. Dominion fleets stopped firing. Even civilians across the planet stared upward in shock. Then every communication channel across the battlefield activated at once. A single human voice echoed through space. Humanity has returned. And for the first time in 6 years, the Carvax Dominion hesitated. Silence spread across the battlefield like a shockwave. The newly arrived Terran fleet stood motionless above Valaris Prime, stretching endlessly across space like a black steel horizon. Thousands of warships hovered in perfect formation, their blue engines glowing against the darkness while shattered debris drifted around them from the ruined battle below. No one in the galaxy had ever seen technology like this. The ships carried no visible insignias, no diplomatic markers, no known energy signatures. Only weapons, huge ones. Inside the command bunker, Orion officers stared at the tactical display in disbelief as new sensor readings flooded their systems. "They're massive," one analyst whispered. Another officer zoomed in on the central Terran flagship and nearly lost his voice. "That vessel alone is larger than our capital city." The giant ship floated at the center of the Armada like a sleeping titan. Its black armor plating looked ancient, scarred by wars far older than the Orion Union itself. Tower-like cannons lined its surface, while enormous hangar bays slowly opened across its sides. Marshal Kale narrowed his eyes. "Can we identify the class designation?" The answer came immediately. "No records exist, sir." Meanwhile, aboard the Dominion command carrier, Warlord Draxel Vorn watched the Terran fleet with growing unease. Around him, his officers argued in panic while warning alarms flashed red across the bridge. "Supreme Warlord, we're unable to penetrate their communications. Our scanners cannot calculate their total fleet numbers. Energy outputs exceed known military limits." Draxel slammed one clawed fist against his throne. "Enough." The bridge instantly fell silent. The warlord slowly stood and stared at the human fleet through the giant forward viewport. For decades, he had conquered worlds without fear. Entire species surrendered at the mere sight of Dominion warships. But this felt different. The Terrans weren't reacting like frightened survivors. They looked calm, prepared, like predators entering familiar territory. Then something strange happened. A deep sound suddenly echoed through open communication frequencies across the entire battlefield. Music. Heavy drums thundered through space transmissions, followed by low human voices singing in an unknown language. The sound rolled through military channels, civilian frequencies, and emergency broadcasts simultaneously. Orion officers exchanged confused looks. "Are they broadcasting war signals?" someone asked nervously. Kale listened carefully. The music felt cold, controlled, almost ritualistic. "No," he answered quietly. "They're sending a message." Above the planet, Dominion fleets suddenly repositioned into attack formation. Hundreds of massive alien warships rotated toward the Terran Armada as plasma weapons began charging simultaneously. Draxel's voice roared across Dominion channels. Destroy them! The stars exploded into light. Thousands of plasma beams tore through space toward the Terran fleet, bright enough to illuminate the entire system blue and red. Orion civilians watched in horror from the planet below as the barrage slammed directly into the human formation. The explosions were enormous. Fire consumed everything. Entire sections of space disappeared behind expanding shockwaves. For several seconds, nobody could see the Terran ships anymore. Then the smoke cleared, and the human fleet hadn't moved. Not one ship was destroyed. A faint layer of blue energy shimmered across the Terran vessels like calm water beneath moonlight. Their shields had absorbed everything. Complete silence hit the battlefield. Even Dominion crews froze. One Orion technician whispered the impossible words. They tanked the entire barrage. Then a Terran battleship slowly moved forward from the formation. Its hull alone dwarfed nearby Dominion cruisers. Along its center line, massive armored panels began separating one after another, revealing a gigantic cannon hidden inside the ship itself. Blue energy surged through the weapon. Warning alarms instantly exploded across every Dominion bridge. Extreme energy spike detected. That output level is impossible. Supreme Warlord, we need to retreat now. But Draxel refused. Fire again. Before the second Dominion barrage launched, the Terran cannon fired. A blinding beam of blue-white light erupted across space. 3 Dominion capital ships vanished instantly. Not damaged. Not crippled. Erased. The beam continued forward through the enemy formation, ripping through dozens more ships like paper before finally disappearing into deep space. The battlefield went dark again. Burning debris floated everywhere. Entire Dominion battle lines were simply gone. Panic spread instantly. Alien ships broke formation and began retreating in every direction. Some even collided with each other while trying to escape. "They're running," an Orion officer shouted in disbelief. "They're actually running." For the first time in 6 years, the Carvax Dominion was retreating from battle. Draxel Vorn's face twisted with rage. "COWARDS," he roared across his fleet channels. "Stand your ground." But fear had already infected his forces. Then the giant Terran flagship finally transmitted a direct message. This time, the voice sounded unmistakably human. "Cold, steady, terrifyingly calm. You attacked civilian worlds," the voice said. Across the battlefield, hundreds of Terran weapons began charging simultaneously. "You slaughtered children." Another line of human warships advanced slowly forward. And humanity remembers every grave. Inside the massive flagship, deep beneath armored decks, a sealed chamber slowly opened for the first time in decades. Cold mist spilled across the floor. A lone armored figure stepped forward from the darkness. His black combat armor carried deep scars from ancient wars. A glowing blue visor covered his eyes, while mechanical systems hissed softly around him. Terran officers nearby immediately stepped aside without speaking. Because every human aboard that ship knew the legend awakening before them. The last Reaper had entered the war. Deep inside the Terran flagship, silence followed the armored figure like a shadow. The massive corridors of the warship trembled faintly beneath distant weapon fire, yet every officer, soldier, and technician standing nearby instinctively stepped aside as the man walked past. No one spoke. No one even dared make eye contact for long. Because everyone aboard knew exactly who he was. The last Reaper, a name buried inside classified military archives for centuries. A ghost from humanity's darkest era. The armored warrior moved slowly through the steel hallway, his heavy footsteps echoing against the walls. His black combat armor looked ancient compared to modern Terran equipment, covered in scars, burn marks, and faded insignias from forgotten wars. Small streams of blue light glowed through narrow openings in the plating while mechanical systems hissed softly around him. One young Terran officer quietly whispered to another, "I thought he was dead." The older officer kept his eyes forward. We all hoped he was. Meanwhile, the battle above Valaris Prime grew even more chaotic. The Dominion fleet, shaken by the arrival of humanity, had begun retreating from Terran firepower, but not entirely. Smaller Dominion assault groups broke formation and descended toward the planet's evacuation zones. If they could not win in orbit, they would slaughter civilians instead. Across the burning surface of Valaris Prime, evacuation ships lifted desperately from ruined cities while alien attack craft hunted them through the skies. One transport carrying thousands of refugees barely escaped a collapsing tower before Dominion fighters opened fire across its engines. The pilot screamed into comms, "We're hit, we're losing thrust." Panic erupted inside the crowded transport. Families held each other tightly while emergency lights flashed red through the cabin. Children cried as the ship shook violently from another impact. Then the rear hull alarms activated. Boarding breach detected. A section of the transport exploded inward. Dominion soldiers stormed inside immediately. Towering armored aliens carrying plasma rifles pushed through smoke and sparks without mercy. The first civilians trying to run were shot instantly. Screams filled the transport as passengers scattered in terror through the narrow corridors. One Dominion commander raised his weapon toward a terrified child hiding beside her mother. Then suddenly, the lights went out. Complete darkness swallowed the corridor. For several seconds, only distant screams echoed through the ship. Then came something worse. Heavy footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. One Dominion soldier activated a shoulder lamp nervously. The beam revealed empty corridors covered in smoke. Another soldier moved carefully around the corner. A loud metallic sound suddenly echoed nearby. Then screaming. Short. Violent. Abruptly cut off. The soldiers spun around in panic. What's happening? No answer came. Only darkness. One by one, Dominion troops disappeared into the shadows. Plasma rifles fired wildly through the corridor while terrified aliens shouted over each other. Then emergency lighting flickered back on. The hallway became visible again. Bodies covered the walls. Dominion soldiers lay broken across the floor in pieces of armor and blood. Deep slash marks carved through the steel itself as smoke drifted silently through the corridor. Standing at the far end of the hallway was a single figure. The last Reaper. His glowing blue visor stared directly at the surviving aliens, while a long energy blade burned in his hand like blue fire. For the first time in years, Dominion soldiers looked afraid. One alien stepped backward slowly. Impossible. The Reaper began walking toward them. Calmly, without hesitation, the soldiers opened fire instantly. Blue plasma bolts slammed directly into the warrior, but the Reaper moved faster than their eyes could follow. His blade flashed once through the darkness. The first soldier fell apart instantly. Another fired desperately before the Reaper grabbed him by the throat and hurled him through the wall with horrifying strength. The corridor became chaos. Sparks exploded. Bodies crashed against metal. The Reaper moved through the enemy formation like a machine built only for war. Within seconds, only one Dominion soldier remained alive. The terrified alien collapsed backward against the wall, shaking uncontrollably while staring up at the armored human standing over him. "That's not a human," the soldier whispered weakly. For a moment, the Reaper said nothing. Then he slowly removed part of his helmet. A scarred human face appeared beneath the armor. One cybernetic eye glowed faint blue while deep battle scars stretched across his skin. Cold, emotionless eyes locked onto the terrified alien. "You're right," the Reaper answered quietly. The soldier trembled harder. The human leaned closer. "I stopped being human a very long time ago." Suddenly, alarms erupted throughout the transport ship. Outside the damaged vessel, dozens of new Dominion warships dropped from hyperspace directly above Valaris Prime. Their arrival blocked entire sections of the sky as civilians below screamed in panic once again. Inside the Terran flagship, warning signals flashed across every command screen. Marshal Kale stared at the tactical display in disbelief. There are too many. Even the Terran fleet could not intercept them all in time. Then another signal appeared. A massive object emerging from deep space beyond the battlefield. Unknown, enormous, and heading straight toward the planet. The new arrival tore through hyperspace like a wound opening in reality. Across every sensor grid of the Terran Armada, alarms erupted instantly. Whatever was entering the system was not a single ship. It was a moving fortress, vast enough to distort gravitational fields around Valaris Prime itself. Inside the Orion Union command bunker, Marshal Kale stared at the holographic display in disbelief. That signature, it's not registering as a ship, one analyst whispered. It's registering as a planetary structure. Above the battlefield, the Dominion fleets that had begun retreating suddenly stabilized. Then turned, reinforced. Hundreds of warships regrouped around the massive incoming object, like a swarm gathering around a hive queen. On Dominion channels, Warlord Draxel Vorn's voice thundered once more. Activate the World Spear. The words alone made even his officers hesitate. The incoming structure finally emerged from hyperspace. It was not a ship. It was a weapon. A colossal mobile fortress built from thousands of fused war hulls, covered in rotating cannons and biomechanical engines pulsing with dark red energy. Entire sections of its surface shifted like living metal, assembling and reassembling as it advanced. One Terran officer muttered in disbelief. That thing is built to kill planets. Inside the Terran flagship, tactical systems instantly recalculated. Planetary annihilation risk critical, an AI voice reported. Marshal Kale's hands tightened into fists. It's aimed at Valaris Prime. The World Spear began charging. Red energy gathered at its core like a collapsing star. Entire Dominion fleets moved into protective formation around it, sacrificing themselves to ensure the weapon fired. Then Draxel's voice returned across all channels. If I cannot conquer this world, I will erase it. On the surface of Valaris Prime, civilians froze as the sky turned red. Evacuation ships stopped mid-ascent. Entire cities looked upward, as the planet itself began to glow under the incoming energy buildup. Panic spread instantly. Inside a damaged evacuation transport, a child pressed her face against the window. Mom, the sky is bleeding. Back in orbit, the Terran Armada shifted formation. Every ship turned toward the World Spear simultaneously. Then something unexpected happened. They did not fire. Instead, the entire fleet moved in perfect synchronization, forming a wide circular pattern around the weapon. Kale frowned. They're surrounding it, why? On the Terran flagship bridge, a senior commander spoke quietly. They're not trying to destroy it. They're containing it. Suddenly, dozens of Terran ships detached from formation and accelerated forward at impossible speed. Their engines flared blue-white as they slammed directly into Dominion defensive lines. The battle erupted again. But this time it was different. The Terrans were no longer defending. They were advancing. Relentlessly. Precision strikes tore through Dominion formations. Entire squadrons vanished under coordinated fire. The Dominion, once considered unstoppable, began collapsing under sheer tactical superiority. And still, the World Spear kept charging. Inside its core, Draxel stood on a massive command platform surrounded by glowing reactors. Hold the line, he roared. Do not let them disrupt the charge. But fear was already spreading through his forces. Because the humans weren't behaving like any enemy they had faced before. They were not panicking, not retreating, not negotiating. They were executing war like mathematics. Perfect, cold, unstoppable. Then suddenly, a Terran battleship broke through Dominion defenses and fired a focused beam directly into one of the World Spear's external stabilizers. The structure trembled. A small section of armor collapsed inward. Draxel snarled in rage. Repair it. But before repairs could begin, Another Terran ship struck. Then another. And another. A chain reaction of precision attacks spread across the fortress like lightning. Inside the Terran flagship, Marshal Kale watched in stunned silence as the tactical map began shifting. The Dominion fleet was no longer holding. It was breaking. "They're collapsing," an officer whispered. "Their formations are dissolving." On the battlefield, entire Dominion wings began retreating without orders. Some ships even disengaged weapons entirely and fled into open space. For the first time in centuries of conquest, the Carvax Dominion was losing control of its own empire. Then, from deep inside the Terran formation, a single signal activated. A private channel. The last Reaper. He stood alone inside a captured transport ship, surrounded by corpses and flickering emergency lights. His blade was still active, dripping energy that dissolved metal where it touched. He looked up slowly and spoke one sentence into the Terran command network. "I'm going in." Far above him, the World Spear finished its final charging sequence. Valaris Prime began to glow red-hot beneath the sky. And inside the Dominion fortress, Draxel Vorn smiled for the first time in years. "Too late," he whispered. The weapon reached full power, and the countdown to planetary extinction hit 0. The World Spear fired. A silent pulse of red light expanded outward from its core, swallowing space itself as it traveled toward Valaris Prime. For a fraction of a second, the entire planet glowed like a dying star. Then the Terran Armada moved. Every ship fired at once, not to destroy the beam, but to intercept it. A lattice of blue energy formed across the planet's orbit, locking into a defensive grid so precise it looked like a constructed barrier in space. The Dominion's planet-killing energy struck the grid and stopped. For the first time, the World Spear hesitated. Inside the Carvax Dominion command fortress, Warlord Draxel Vorn stared at the failing energy readouts in disbelief. "That's impossible." The system was supposed to be unstoppable, a weapon designed to erase continents in a single breath. And yet, it was being held. On every screen, Terran ships maintained perfect formation, absorbing and dispersing planetary annihilation energy like engineers stabilizing a collapsing structure rather than soldiers fighting a war. Marshal Kale watched in stunned silence. "They're not just blocking it," he whispered. "They're controlling it." Then something worse happened. A Terran signal broke through Dominion communications. No warning. No demand. Just confirmation. Boarding operation initiated. Inside the World Spear, alarms erupted across every deck. Enemy boarding craft detected. Multiple breaches across upper hull. Security systems failing. Draxel slammed his fist against the command console. "Seal every corridor." But it was already too late. Black Terran drop pods pierced the fortress hull like bullets through glass. They embedded into metal, hissed open, and released soldiers into the interior of the largest war machine ever constructed. And among them, one figure fell differently. He didn't land. He descended. The last Reaper. He dropped into the fortress interior through a collapsing breach, his armor glowing faint blue in the red emergency lighting. Around him, Dominion soldiers rushed to intercept. They never reached him. The corridor turned into silence and motion. The Reaper moved forward. One step. A plasma burst fired. He tilted his head slightly. The shot missed. Second step. He raised his blade. The corridor exploded into violence. Dominion troops fired everything they had. Plasma bolts, shock rounds, kinetic bursts, all converging on the lone human walking through the storm. But the Reaper didn't stop. He disappeared between shots, reappeared behind the first squad, and the corridor filled with smoke. By the time the alarms recalculated target tracking, half the unit was gone. One terrified Dominion soldier backed away, whispering into comms. "It's not a boarding party. It's one man." Meanwhile, deeper inside the fortress, Draxel watched security feeds as entire sections of his superweapon went dark one by one. "What is he doing?" he growled. A tactical officer hesitated before answering. "He's moving toward the core." Draxel froze. "That's impossible. There are 47 defense layers between him and—" The screen cut out. Another corridor gone. Then another's. Then another's. Each feed showed the same impossible pattern: silence, motion, and destruction following a single human presence. Inside the Terran flagship, Marshal Kale's voice trembled for the first time. "He's clearing the entire fortress alone." A commander replied quietly, "He always does." On the battlefield outside, the Terran Armada continued holding the world spears, firing energy, straining to prevent planetary annihilation. Ships began overheating. Shield systems flickered. Even they were reaching their limits. But none of them retreated, because they knew what was inside that fortress, and who was walking through it. Inside the world spear, the Reaper finally reached a massive sealed gate. 40 meters of armored alloy, inscribed with Dominion war glyphs, protected by layered defense fields. A voice echoed through intercoms. "Unauthorized entity detected. Terminate immediately." Turrets emerged from the ceiling. They all fired at once. The Reaper raised his blade. And for the first time, he spoke loudly enough for the fortress to hear. "You built a weapon to erase worlds." The energy around him intensified, but forgot someone might walk inside it. The turrets fired. The corridor vanished in light. And when the smoke cleared, the Reaper stood untouched in front of the sealed core door. He placed his hand on it, and it began to crack. Inside the command chamber, Draxel Vorn slowly turned toward the sound. The door was breaking, and for the first time since the Dominion began its conquest, the warlord felt something he had never experienced before. Fear. The sealed core door of the World Spear finally collapsed inward. Not exploded, not breached, collapsed like it had forgotten it was supposed to resist. The last Reaper stepped through the smoke into the heart of the Dominion's ultimate weapon. Inside, the chamber was enormous. A cathedral of war. Giant rotating reactors floated in magnetic suspension, feeding raw planetary destruction energy into the weapon system. Red lightning crawled across transparent conduits. Entire sections of the room pulsed like a living heart made of machines. At the center stood Warlord Draxel Vorn. Waiting. He did not attack immediately. Instead, he studied the human carefully. "You are one man," Draxel said slowly. "One soldier, and you think you can stop an empire." The Reaper said nothing. He simply walked forward. Behind him, the sealed door reformed slightly, then failed again, collapsing into molten fragments as systems struggled to maintain structural integrity. Draxel's eyes narrowed. "Do you even know what this weapon is?" he asked. The Reaper stopped. For the first time, he looked around the chamber. "I know what it does," he replied calmly. "It erases planets." Draxel smiled faintly. "Incorrect," he said. "It erases resistance." He stepped closer to the central reactor. "This weapon is not built for war," he continued. "It is built for order. Every civilization we destroyed resisted. Every resistance created chaos, and chaos must be removed." The Reaper tilted his head slightly. "Order built on extinction is just fear with better technology." Draxel's expression hardened. "You speak like a child who has never understood the galaxy." A brief silence followed. Then, the Reaper finally answered. "I have seen more of the galaxy than you ever will." He raised his hand slightly, and the visor of his helmet flickered. For a moment, the chamber's lights distorted, and something inside the system reacted. Deep within the Terran flagship, alarms erupted instantly. Unknown neural signature detected. Reaper biometric link activating. Marshal Kale stared at the display in shock. "What is he doing?" A senior officer went pale. "He's connecting to the fleet." Outside the World Spear, the entire Terran Armada suddenly shifted. Every ship rotated in perfect synchronization. Their weapons stopped firing, their shields stabilized, and every Terran soldier across the battlefield paused at the exact same moment, as if hearing a silent command only they could understand. Kale's voice dropped. "No, that's not a signal system. That's him." Inside the fortress, Draxel noticed it too. For the first time, the Terran fleet was no longer acting like a fleet. It was acting like a single organism. Draxel stepped back slightly. "What are you?" he asked quietly. The Reaper's voice softened. "Not emotional. Not angry. Just distant." "Humanity," he said. Draxel scoffed. "That is impossible. Humanity destroyed itself centuries ago. Your species collapsed in internal war. That is what the records say." The Reaper walked closer. Those records were incomplete. He stopped beneath the glowing reactor core. "They don't mention what came after." Suddenly, the chamber lights dimmed. The Reaper's voice echoed more clearly. "We didn't go extinct. We evolved." A violent pulse of energy spread through the room. Draxel took another step back. Inside the Terran fleet, every ship's systems began syncing automatically. Weapons, shields, navigation, all merging into a single unified network. Kale whispered in disbelief. "They're not separate ships anymore. They're one system." Inside the World Spear, the Reaper raised his blade slightly. "And when you forced us to return," his visor flared brighter, "you woke something you were never meant to see." Draxel's confidence finally cracked. "What did I wake?" The Reaper looked directly at him and answered, "Us." Suddenly, every Terran ship fired simultaneously, but not at the enemy fleet. At the World Spear itself. Not to destroy it, but to destabilize its core structure. The entire fortress shook violently. Systems screamed in overload. Draxel staggered as gravity inside the chamber shifted unpredictably. "You're sacrificing your fleet," he roared. The Reaper stepped forward. "No," he said. "We're ending yours." The central reactor behind Draxel began to crack. Red energy spilled into the chamber like blood from a broken star. And for the first time in the war, the Carvex Dominion's ultimate weapon began to die. Draxel looked at the collapsing system around him, then at the Reaper, and finally understood. This was not an invasion. This was extinction in reverse. And humanity had decided the Dominion would be the one erased. Outside, the World Spear's firing sequence shattered. Valeris Prime began to cool. But inside the fortress core, something far more dangerous than the weapon itself had awakened. And it was still standing. The World Spear did not explode. It screamed. Across the battlefield, every sensor in the system overloaded as the colossal Dominion superweapon began collapsing inward on itself. Its planetary annihilation core, once stable, controlled, absolute, now fractured under impossible internal strain. Inside the chamber, Warlord Draxel Vorn staggered as the reactor behind him cracked open like a dying star. "You're destroying it," he roared at the Reaper. "You're killing the only order this galaxy has ever known." The last Reaper stood motionless amid the shaking chamber. Blue light from the collapsing core reflected off his armor like a ghostly fire. "Order built on graves isn't order," he replied quietly. "It's delay." Draxel's expression twisted with rage and disbelief. "You think you understand balance. You think humanity is different." The Reaper tilted his head slightly. "We didn't come here for balance." A violent tremor ripped through the fortress. Entire sections of the World Spear's inner structure began to break apart as Terran fleet coordination attacks destabilized its outer hull. Massive armored plates peeled away like burnt skin. Outside, the Terran Armada held formation, but it was no longer just a fleet. It had become something else. Every ship pulsed in synchronized rhythm, feeding targeting data into a unified war net. Their movement was too precise, too coordinated, like a single consciousness spread across thousands of vessels. Inside the Orion Union command bunker, Marshal Kale watched in stunned silence. "They're not communicating anymore," he whispered. A technician nodded slowly. "It's like they already know what each other will do before it happens." Kale's voice lowered. "That's impossible." Back inside the World Spear, alarms reached a fever pitch. Then, something new awakened. From deep within the collapsing fortress core, a secondary containment chamber ruptured open. A pulse of black-red energy exploded outward. Even the Reaper took a half-step back. Draxel's eyes widened. "No, no, no, no." The chamber walls tore apart as something massive began to rise from within the World Spear's deepest layer. Not a system, not a reactor, a thing, biomechanical, living, ancient. It unfolded itself from the core like a nightmare-given structure. Metal fused with organic muscle, armor grown rather than built. A colossal entity, chained to the weapon system itself, began dragging itself free as the containment failed. The Dominion's true final defense. The Carvax war entity. Draxel laughed suddenly, broken, desperate. "You thought the World Spear was the weapon," he shouted. "It was only the trigger." The creature roared. The sound rippled through the fortress, shaking entire structural layers loose. Outside, Dominion fleets halted their retreat as panic spread across all channels. "What is that thing?" "It's not in our records." That wasn't part of the design. Inside the Terran flagship, every alarm turned red at once. "Unknown bioorganic entity DATCTD. Classification, planetary-level threat." Marshal Kale stepped forward. "That wasn't in their arsenal reports." A senior officer looked pale. "Because it wasn't an arsenal." Back inside the collapsing fortress core, the war entity fully emerged. It stood taller than entire city blocks. Its limbs were fused weapons and living tissue, pulsing with stolen Dominion energy. Its head turned slowly toward the Reaper. And it recognized him. The creature screamed again, this time with rage. Draxel pointed at the Reaper. "That is what you are fighting," he shouted. "The end of every resistance, the punishment for defiance." The war entity lunged. The entire chamber shattered as it moved. The Reaper was struck head-on. A massive blow sent him crashing through reinforced walls, ripping him across the chamber like a meteor. Entire sections of the World Spear bent under the impact. Outside, the Terran fleet faltered for the first time. One ship's shield collapsed. Then another's. Kale's voice rose. "We're losing synchronization." Inside the fortress, the war entity advanced again, crushing everything in its path. Its body regenerated instantly from damage, reforming destroyed limbs in seconds. The Reaper stood slowly. His armor cracked slightly. Blue energy flickered beneath it. For the first time in the war, he hesitated. Draxel saw it and smiled. "You see," he whispered, "even your monster bleeds." The war entity roared again and charged. This time, the Reaper did not dodge fast enough. The impact obliterated a section of the chamber. Massive structural beams snapped. Energy conduits exploded. The Reaper was buried beneath collapsing metal. Silence followed. Outside, the Terran Armada froze. Kale whispered in disbelief. "No." A pause. Then, a faint pulse echoed through every Terran ship. Slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat. The buried Reaper moved. Under tons of collapsed structure, beneath burning debris and fractured alloy, blue light began to rise again. Stronger than before. Draxel's smile faded. Because the pulse was no longer coming from one man. It was coming from all of them. Across the fleet, every Terran soldier felt it at the same time. A memory. A command. An awakening. Inside the wreckage, the Reaper's voice returned, calm, deeper, no longer entirely human. "You made a mistake," he said softly. The debris lifted. Slowly, violently, with impossible force. And now you've woken the part of us you can't kill. The Reaper stood once more. But something had changed. He was no longer alone. The World Spear was dying. Not from damage alone, but from collapse of every system that had once made it possible. Its vast biomechanical frame twisted in orbit like a wounded god, shedding armor plates the size of cities as Terran fleet coordination attacks unraveled its internal structure layer by layer. Inside the core chamber, the war entity roared again, louder this time, more desperate. Its regenerative systems flickered under the pressure of something it could not understand. The Reaper stood before it, unmoving. But he was no longer just one man. Across the battlefield, every Terran vessel pulsed in perfect synchronization. The Armada was no longer acting independently. It was responding like a single organism. A collective will stretched across thousands of ships, all focused into one point. Marshal Kale stared at the tactical display, shaken. "They're not just coordinated anymore," he whispered. "They're unified." A senior officer turned slowly. Unified into what? Kale didn't answer. Because he already knew. Inside the collapsing world spear, Warlord Draxel Vorn stumbled backward as alarms screamed from every direction. The war entity, once his ultimate weapon, was now faltering, its movements slower, less controlled, as if it too was losing grip on reality. "This is impossible," Draxel muttered. "It was designed to outlive all resistance." The Reaper took a step forward. The chamber shook. "You built something to survive everything," he said quietly, "but you never considered what happens when everything fights back at once." The war entity lunged again. Faster, more violent. It struck the Reaper with enough force to tear a kilometer-wide section of the chamber apart. Entire reactor lines exploded. The World Spear screamed as structural integrity dropped below critical thresholds. For a moment, silence. Then the Reaper moved. Not as a soldier, not as a weapon, but as something deeper. His hand rose, and the entire Terran Armada outside stopped firing. Every ship, every cannon, every engine pulse, frozen in perfect stillness. Kale's eyes widened. What just happened, eh? Then the answer came. The Reaper's voice echoed through every Terran channel at once. Soft, calm, absolute. End it. The words were not loud, but they were final. Across the battlefield, the Armada responded. Not with missiles, not with beams, but with a synchronized energy cascade that linked every Terran vessel into a single firing matrix. For the first time in the war, space itself seemed to bend under unified human command. Inside the World Spear, Draxel finally understood. "They aren't a fleet," he whispered. "They're a weapon system." The Terran Armada fired. A single concentrated wave of blue-white energy collapsed inward from all directions, converging not on the World Spear itself, but on its core reality anchors, the structures that held its existence stable. The fortress began to unravel. Not explode. Not burned. Unmake. The war entity screamed as its body destabilized. Its regenerative systems failed. Its structure flickered between existence and non-existence as reality itself rejected it. Draxel fell to his knees. No, this cannot be how it ends." The Reaper approached him slowly. Above them, the chamber ceiling tore open, revealing the burning remains of the World Spear's collapsing exterior. Valeris Prime was visible again. Safe. Breathing. Alive. Draxel looked up at the Reaper one last time. "You could have ruled," he said weakly. "You could have taken everything." The Reaper shook his head. "We already learned what ruling becomes," he replied. A pause. Then softer. "That's why we stopped being conquerors." Behind them, the war entity disintegrated completely, its final roar swallowed by collapsing space-time as the Terran cascade reached completion. The World Spear began to fall apart across every layer simultaneously. Outside, Dominion fleets attempted to retreat, but their jump lanes collapsed. Their systems failed. Their command structure broke apart into chaos. For the first time in its history, the Carvex Dominion stopped being an empire. It became survivors. Inside the Terran flagship, Marshal Kale watched as the last remnants of the enemy fleet scattered into darkness. And then, the Reaper spoke once more. This time not to Draxel, not to his fleet, but across every frequency in the galaxy. Every planet, every system, every listening station. His voice carried, "We are not your enemy." A pause. The burning remains of the World Spear drifted silently behind him. "But we are your warning." The Terran Armada gathered behind him in formation, silent, immense, endless. "If you build empires on extinction." The Reaper's visor glowed faintly. "We will return." Silence followed. Not fear, not celebration, just understanding spreading across the stars. The Terran Armada began to vanish into hyperspace one by one. Valaris Prime remained untouched below. The Orion Union survived. And in the void where the Dominion once ruled, only one truth remained. Humanity had not come to conquer the galaxy. They had come to remind it. And the galaxy would never forget again.